My name is Eric Solis, the HRPP IRB Program Manager, and I'm very happy that you've joined us for this month's Research Matters on Full Board Submissions. So my goal today is to cover what you need to know when submitting a study requiring full board review. I will begin with a brief overview. I don't need that, move that over here, sorry. I'll begin with a brief overview of what studies require full board review, then describe the process for steps such as requesting access to e-research applications, submitting a COI disclosure statement, creating a study in VELOS, then building a study in eIRB. I will then cover which forms are needed and speak to the information HRPP is looking for in these forms. I will also provide a high-level overview on the importance for why drugs and devices are listed in eIRB, and touch on the importance of accurately and appropriately listing research-related imaging. I will end the session with the reason why HRPP staff ask you for the information they do. We should also have time to cover questions. Please also note you can ask questions throughout this presentation by typing them into the question portal. So let's start with covering the studies that do not require full board review. At the Research Matters in November of last year, expedited research submissions were covered in detail. I will only touch on the expedited review categories listed here, as research that falls into one or more of these categories are not reviewed by the full board because this research does not rise to the level of risk for which the board is mandated to review. That includes research on drugs or devices where there is no IND or IDE required, blood collections where the amounts and timing limits apply, collection of biological specimens by non-invasive means, the collection of non-invasive data, not including radiation, collection of data including specimens not eligible for exemption, the collection of data via recordings, albeit audio, video, or photograph, survey and observational research, continuing review of research previously approved by a full board, and category 9, continuing review of research that not conducted under an IND application or IDE application, and where categories 2 through 8 do not apply. Okay, so these are only examples of the types of research reviewed by the full board, and only meant to give you an idea of the research the IRB typically reviews. So let's see, clinical investigation studying a drug or drugs and or a device or devices. Research studying a biological and or combination product are also examples of research that must be reviewed by the full board. Research involving research related to radiation imaging scans such as X-ray, CT scans, PET scans, MUGA scans, and or DEXA scans, as well as any radioisotopes are reviewed by the full board. The board reviews research studies that pose greater than minimal risk to participants. And sometimes these studies, sometimes we send studies to the full board when the designated reviewer, which are most of my staff who are designated by the full board, the chairs to approve on their behalf, if they see a study where there's question or uncertainty on the level of risk or the patient population exposed to these risks, they will sometimes send those studies to the full board. So again, all research that poses greater than minimal risk to subjects must undergo full board review. So your first steps are to request e-research access by completing the online form found on the HRPP website. In addition to this, you need to complete the required CITI training that consists of good clinical practice, human subject protection, and research HIPAA. I've also included here that you'll need to submit your statement of financial interest or conflict of interest statement if you have UT Southwestern credentials or not. This is completed in COI Smart. The links in this slide are executable, so when you receive this after the session, those links should work. So you'll then need to complete your study in VELOS so that a draft can be created in eIRB. So this slide outlines the steps to complete before submitting in VELOS. So basically you're going to log in, complete the summary tab, complete the local sample size, complete the site/team tab, and then complete the study status tab, and then submit to eIRB. I don't have it included here, but you can find these instructions on our website as well. The e-signature is 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're not really putting your name in that field, you're putting 1, 2, 3, 4. And then after that, your draft is created, and VELOS speaks to eIRB, and you'll find your draft in eIRB. Okay, so let's start going over the forms. So Form A is your protocol. You can see there are various Form A's based on the protocol, the type of protocol. Form A is which is the HRPP investigator-initiated research description, contains questions that may supplement the protocol you may already have. So please don't be frustrated if HRPP staff requests that you provide this form because it may be needed to provide additional information not included in the existing protocol. In addition, if you are submitting only the investigator-initiated research description, please make sure you include the appropriate sample size justification and statistical analysis plan that will be used to support the purpose of your study. The full board cannot approve a study without having a sufficient and appropriate data analysis plan. Enrolling too many subjects and more than what a sample size justification and data analysis plan would outline could be placing additional subjects at risk of harm than is necessary. HRPP, so moving over to the Simmons Comprehensive Cancer Center protocol. So we've been seeing a problem with cancer-related studies. So when submitting a new cancer-related study or modification to a cancer-related protocol, PRMC requires specific forms to be submitted online for the review. PRMC has two board meetings per month to review these submissions and cannot schedule your study or protocol modification until all documents have been submitted. In addition, the IRB cannot schedule a new cancer-related study or protocol modification to an IRB meeting until PRMC has provided the item or approval. Therefore, it is important that all forms requested by PRMC be submitted in a timely manner to avoid a delay in IRB review and approval of your study or modification. Forms can be found at this link. Okay, moving over to the next slide for form. So Form B, if possible, please complete the study personnel form by entering all study personnel in the order they appear in Section 3 of the IRB. This will be beneficial to both you as a study team member or researcher, as well as the HRPP staff. Form C, so the expectation is that you will include all study populations on this form and complete each section of this form for each subject population you plan to enroll in your study. This form also assists the IRB to determine and assess whether your recruitment and consenting plan are appropriate. How are you recruiting potential participants? And are you consenting them at the appropriate time and giving them sufficient time to decide whether they want to participate? How are you protecting their privacy during the consenting process? Whether you are including non-English speakers, and if not, why not? Following the ethical principle of justice, which speaks to including all populations in the community so that all experience the benefits and burdens of research. When determining whether your research will include a non-English speaking population, ask yourself whether the research provides the potential for direct benefit. And if your answer is yes, then it may be unethical and inappropriate to exclude non-English speakers from your research. The IRB asks this question during the review of research when the IRB determines a study has the potential to provide direct benefit to non-English speakers. The IRB will request to provide a fully translated consent form. Please note that the lack of funding may not be accepted as justification to the board. Please further note when a study involves the use of standardized assessments or questionnaires that are only validated in English, it may be justifiable to not include non-English speaking subjects. Form D. This form is needed and required to be submitted for research reviewed by the full board. Per policy, we require our investigators to monitor data for safety of local subjects. This is in addition to any external DSMB or DSMC that may exist for any industry-sponsored study, and in addition to any internal DSMC, such as the Simmons Comprehensive Cancer Center, PRMC DSMC. The IRB must determine as part of the approval criteria whether the data safety monitoring plan is appropriate. Without this information and form, the IRB may need to defer your study. So as you know, Form E is the code for the informed consent document used for all research. Please note that while we do not require the use of this template, we strongly encourage its use because it contains specific UT Southwestern language that has been reviewed and approved by UT Southwestern Legal. If you do not use our template, you are asked to incorporate our language into the template provided by the sponsor. Please also remember the consent form must be written in a language that's understandable to the subject and should be written at a level that would be understandable to a patient seen in the clinical setting. It is important to remember that subjects do not understand medical jargon, terminology, and verbiage that medical and research professionals understand. In addition, we have English and Spanish informed consent templates for expanded access programs and protocols. In addition, keep in mind that our current templates are the combined consent and HIP authorization. Legacy studies or pre-IRB light studies, and some reliant studies such as the NCI-CIRB contain standalone consent and HIPAA authorization documents. Form G. Form G is used to request waiver or alteration of informed consent and necessary full board studies when subjects will perform or undergo research procedures prior to the signing of a consent form. An example of this, which is on the form, is having patients fast prior to signing the consent form. There are other situations that also would require this form for having individuals provide verbal consent before they sign the full consent form. Form H is a form used for requesting waiver and or alteration of HIPAA authorization. Please be aware that if you are requesting more than one of these, such as a partial waiver and an alteration of HIPAA authorization, you are to use this form for each and not include both in one form. One of the common errors that we see on this form is in question 3E, which the section heading is identifiers collected with health information, where the question is asking you to keep the listing of HIPAA identifiers and remove those that will not be linked. I see this form many times that have all the 18 identifiers, and that's not what's being collected. So be very cognizant of that. Form HSF is used when you use the non-English short form consent to request for alteration of HIPAA authorization from patients that present unexpectedly. This form is used to waive all or some of the elements of a pending HIPAA authorization. Form J is not a form we ask you to complete, but it is the naming convention for all data collection tools. Need some water, excuse me. Form K is a population form. When your research involves children as subjects, in addition to listing children in Form C, this form is used to inform the IRB the level of risk the research poses to children. This form lists the different levels of risk that research may pose to children and requests information related to obtaining assent from children when and if applicable. Additional information is requested for providing justification for including children in the research and for whether assent will be obtained or waived. If you indicate the plan is to obtain assent, the expectation is that you will also include and indicate the methods for assessing a child's dissent to participate. The expectation is that this form will be completed with sufficient detail so that the IRB can determine whether it is appropriate to include children in the plan to protect this population. This form also includes a section for wards of the state. So when enrolling children who are wards of the state, this is a very long process, as the permission must come from the state for that child to participate in research. It is also important to ensure that the appropriate legally authorized representative is providing the parental permission for a child to participate in research. Please note that foster parents cannot consent for a child to participate, and neither can a grandparent, unless these individuals are the LAR for the child. With regard to the signing of a consent form by the LAR, for minimal risk and greater than minimal risk research where there's a potential for direct benefit, requires that one parent or LAR provide parental permission by signing the consent form. For greater than minimal risk research without the potential for direct benefit, regulations require that both parents or LARs sign the consent form when both are readily available. Please note, readily available does not mean one parent is not present because they're out of town or at work. Single parenting may not mean the other parent is not available either. If you have a situation where you are unsure, please contact the HRPP staff for guidance. Form L is the form used to detail the involvement and justification for including adults with impaired decision-making capacity and those individuals who will lose their capacity to consent during the conduct of the study. This form assists the IRB with determining whether it is appropriate to include this population in the plan in place to protect this population during their participation, explaining why it is suitable for this population to participate in the research and how the additional risk of their inclusion is mitigated, noting who's responsible for determining the patient's competency to consent, and describing how you will identify who is authorized to give legally valid consent. Assist the IRB with making this determination. Form M is a form used when your research targets and involves prisoners and contains specific regulatory categories that outline the types of research for which prisoners may be involved. This form is also not used if you have a study and you're not targeting this population and one of your participants It lets you know and discloses they were arrested. This is not that type of research. You have to be targeting this population. Form O is used when research involves pregnant women, human fetuses, and/or neonates. This form outlines specific regulatory categories for each of these populations, where justification for including these populations and the risk to each of these populations must be provided. This form is typically used to indicate the inclusion of female subjects who become pregnant during participation, where the subject is taken off study drug and is followed for data collection specific to the pregnancy. So I strongly recommend that you contact HRPP staff if you propose to involve these populations in research when the involvement is more than following pregnancy. So before I speak to Form 01, I wanted to remind the community that the HRPP previously communicated that we do not see these individuals, pregnant partners, as study subjects. So if your sponsor wants to include this population, this is what you have to do, the following. So Form 01 should be used when the sponsor requests that female partners of male subjects actively taking study drug become pregnant. For the IRB to review and approve the specific population, in addition to Form 01, a consent form for pregnant partners must be submitted, in addition to Form C, listing this population that outlines the appropriate recruitment and consenting plan. Please note, it is not appropriate to obtain the name of the pregnant partner from the male subject. The male subject should provide the name and contact information of the PI or study team member to the pregnant partner so that the decision to be followed is solely the decision of the pregnant partner. If the above is not provided, all in one submission, either in a mod or at the new time of this time of a new study, the IRB will not approve the inclusion of this population. Form Q is to be completed when the research involves a placebo that will take place of the subject's standard of care. It's kind of self-explanatory, but I wanted to include it. So, to request the HRPPO to facilitate translation of documents using HRPPO's vendor, you use Form Z and ensure you list the documents to be translated in the language for which you want the listed documents translated. This form must also include the chart of accounts so that the translation fee can be applied to the appropriate and correct account. This form also includes a section for requesting a rush. And so either if it's a rush or any of your requests for translation, please be sure to communicate this appropriately with the HRPPO by emailing all correspondence regarding translation requests to hrpp@utsouthwestern.edu. Just note, emailing multiple individuals in the office may delay your request. Form Z1 is a translation verification form that is to be used when you do not use a professional translation service, including the vendor used by the HRPP. This form requires that the name of the individual who translated the documents and another individual who verifies the translation is correct, who in turn signs this form. This is then submitted on behalf of the PI in whom ultimate responsibility certifies the translation is completed and verified appropriately. Okay, the importance of listing drugs. So HRPP staff are often questioned as to why certain drugs need to be listed in EIRB. I'll provide a high-level view for why this is necessary. So according to the FDA, a clinical investigation means any experiment in which a drug is administered or dispensed to or used involving one or more human subjects. This means that all drugs mentioned in the study protocol are protocol-driven and must be included in EIRB. When a drug is used in a research study and indicated in the protocol and instructs the investigator to administer a drug because it's part of the research, this is driven by the protocol. In turn, it is important for all drugs listed in the protocol driven by the research to be included in EIRB so that the IRB can assess the use of the drugs outlined in the protocol and determine whether the uses of these drugs are appropriately listed in the SMART form. Excuse me. So it's important that our SMART form appropriately and accurately lists all FDA-regulated drugs or devices that are included in a protocol and being studied, or sorry, that are protocol-driven. This is because our EIRB is our official record. Our official record must identify and list all drugs and devices or anything that's FDA-regulated appropriately. So the expectation for studies involving an investigational drug is that the FDA-issued study may proceed letter is provided in the SMART form. If this is not provided, While we prefer FDA documentation, letters from the sponsor or IND holder are acceptable as long as they list the IND number and the study title. If neither of these is available, then the IRB will look to the study protocol listing the IND. This is very important because the IRB must assess whether the issued IND is specific to the study in review. Other studies that require an IND are those that involve an FDA-approved drug being used for or under an unapproved indication where the use of the drug does not meet IND exemption criteria. For studies involving an FDA-approved drug used in an unapproved manner without an IND are in turn evaluated by the IRB with the purpose of assessing whether the use of the drug meets IND exemption criteria. This is also very important. Investigators should assess the use of an approved drug used in an unapproved manner prior to submitting to the IRB. If the IRB reviews such type of study without an IND and the board determines the use of that drug does not meet IND exemption criteria, then the IRB will direct the PI to submit an IND application to the FDA. And in turn, this may result in the IRB deferring your study. For research involving an FDA-approved drug during IRB meetings, my team of meeting managers request reviewers to confirm that the use of the listed approved drug is in fact being used under its approved indication. Now let's talk about devices. According to the FDA, the definition of research involving investigational devices is the following. An investigation means a clinical investigation or research involving one or more subjects to determine the safety or effectiveness of a device. A device or devices being studied for safety and efficacy in an investigation must be included in IRB for the IRB to assess the use or uses of the device or devices outlined in the protocol and determine whether the use or uses of the device or devices are appropriately listed in the SMART form. Devices can be investigational, where the device meets the FDA's definition of significant risk, which requires the issuance of an IDE prior to an investigation being initiated. Investigational devices can also be considered non-significant risk devices and determined by the IRB to meet what we call abbreviated IDE requirements. Research also involves approved devices that are being used in accordance with the FDA-approved indication and may also involve approved devices not being used in accordance with its FDA-approved indication. So I realize there are so many questions that surround when to list a device in eIRB. So my answer is really, it depends on what your study involves. Remember, we're looking for devices that are protocol-driven and or being studied. To save time, please reach out to HRPP staff and request to have a quick Teams meeting as opposed to email exchanges. So much more can be accomplished when you meet face-to-face, even if it's virtual. So I could provide a lot more detail with drugs and devices. However, future research matters will cover drugs and devices in separate sessions. The take-home message regarding drugs and devices is to realize and be cognizant for how the IRB handles research involving FDA-regulated drugs and devices, and that they have their own processes to do so. True and real assessments are made during all IRB meetings on the uses of drugs and devices in research. If you have any questions or concerns regarding whether you may need an IND or an IDE, please reach out to the HRPP Regulatory Support Team. I placed a link to our webpage for the Regulatory Support Office in both the drugs and devices slides in this presentation. So regarding SURE review and the inclusion of research-related radiation imaging, the expectation is you and your study team will ensure that radiation imaging is appropriately listed in the SMART form. Otherwise, you may experience delays in the review of your study. Per HRPP policy, SURE review must occur prior to full board review. If SURE does not occur prior to IRB review, the IRB may not have the information necessary to determine whether risks to subjects are minimized. This is one of the approval criteria that guide IRB review. We'll discuss that in the next slide. So what we want and need to prevent is having the IRB review a study and determine at the meeting that SURE review should have taken place, but did not because the SMART form outlines imaging that is clinically indicated. Please seek out guidance from your investigators if you are unsure whether the research for which you are submitting involves research-related imaging scans. For ease of access, I included the link to SURE submission deadline and how that corresponds to their meeting schedule. So why do we ask for this information? So the information included in every new study and the details provided in each of the required forms provides the IRB the ability to assess and determine whether the criteria for approval are met. The IRB is charged with ensuring each study and submission meets or continues to meet all approval criteria. The SMART form and all attached documents are intended to provide a cumulative and comprehensive perspective for what your research involves and entails. Think about this. The IRB needs a certain amount of information to approve your research. That certain information is defined and outlined in the following. So I try my best not to read my own slides, but this is a very important and crucial slide. So before you submit your study in ERB, think about each of these and ask yourself whether you provided enough information for the IRB to make a clear and clean assessment. Please also keep in mind the information and changes requested by HRPP staff are being asked to assist the review by the IRB so that the full board can assess the risk-benefit ratio of your research and ensure the benefits of the research outweighs the risks, ensure the risks to subjects are minimized, ensure the informed consent is obtained and documented appropriately, ensure the selection of subjects is equitable and justified, and include all populations that may receive direct benefit, evaluate whether the data and safety monitoring is appropriate, evaluate whether the protection for privacy and confidentiality are in place for subjects, and ensure other protections are in place for vulnerable populations that you include in your research. So I strongly recommend that you print this slide or save it and refer to this when you are submitting a full board study.